The courtroom fell silent as Sarah Matthews stepped through the heavy wooden doors alone. From the back row, dozens of curious eyes followed her slight figure as she made her way forward, chin held high despite the visible tremble in her hands. Among those watching was her husband, Richard, lounging confidently beside his expensive attorney. A smirk played across his face as he leaned over to whisper something that made his lawyer chuckle. Richard's arrogance filled the room like a toxic cloud. He truly believed this day would end in his victory. If you're finding yourself drawn into this story of justice and redemption, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more powerful true stories that remind us of the strength of the human spirit. Sarah had spent 15 years married to Richard Matthews, a man whose charming public persona masked a private reign of emotional terrorism. To their wealthy social circle, they were the perfect couple, he the successful investment banker, she the devoted wife who managed their immaculate home and raised their 2 children. No one saw the calculated control, the isolation, or the systematic dismantling of Sarah's confidence that occurred behind closed doors. Case number 47293, Matthews vs. Matthews, the bailiff announced, his voice echoing through the high-ceilinged room. Judge Harmon, known throughout the county for her no-nonsense approach and razor-sharp perception, adjusted her glasses as she reviewed the file before her. At 63, Judge Harmon had seen it all in her 3 decades on the bench, but something about this case had caught her attention from the preliminary filings. Richard's smirk widened as Sarah took her seat at the plaintiff's table alone. He had made sure she couldn't afford proper legal representation after freezing their joint accounts and leveraging his connections to discourage local attorneys from taking her case. His own lawyer, James Wilson of the prestigious Wilson and Burke firm, had assured him this would be quick. A woman representing herself against their legal expertise stood no chance, especially with the prenuptial agreement Richard had pressured Sarah to sign 2 decades earlier. Mrs. Matthews, Judge Harmon said, her voice carrying a note of concern, I see you're representing yourself today. Are you certain you wish to proceed without counsel? Sarah stood, smoothing the single professional outfit she had managed to purchase for this day. Yes, Your Honor. I am prepared to represent myself. From the gallery, Richard's laugh was just loud enough to be heard, a deliberate act of intimidation. Judge Harmon's gaze snapped to him, her expression hardening momentarily before returning to Sarah. Very well, the judge said. Mr. Wilson, you may present your client's case. Wilson rose with practiced confidence, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. Mrs. Matthews signed a prenuptial agreement that clearly states she is entitled only to what she brought into the marriage. My client has generously offered a settlement of $50,000, despite the prenup's terms, which we believe is more than fair considering Mrs. Matthews contributed nothing financially to the household during their marriage. Sarah's hands clenched in her lap, but her expression remained composed. The judge nodded, making notes before turning to Sarah. Mrs. Matthews, your response. Sarah stood, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, her trembling stopped. Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that the prenuptial agreement should be invalidated on grounds of duress and coercion. She approached the bench with a thin folder. These are emails from my husband to his attorney at the time, discussing strategies to ensure I would sign without fully understanding the terms. You'll note the date, just 2 days before our wedding, when I was given the document to sign with the clear implication that the wedding would be cancelled if I refused. Judge Harmon reviewed the documents, her expression unreadable. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the smirk fading slightly as he whispered urgently to his attorney. Additionally, Sarah continued, I'd like to address the claim that I contributed nothing financially. While I didn't earn a salary, I request the court recognize the economic value of my unpaid labor as a homemaker, child rearer, and social coordinator for my husband's business relationships. She presented another document. This is an economic analysis of the replacement cost of the services I provided over 15 years, including childcare, household management, meal preparation, and social event planning that directly benefited my husband's career. The total estimated value exceeds $1.2 million. Richard's face darkened as he realized Sarah had come prepared. His attorney looked equally surprised, frantically flipping through his notes. "Furthermore," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger, "I have evidence that Mr. Matthews has been hiding assets." She produced bank statements and offshore account documents. "These accounts in the Cayman Islands were opened using funds from our joint marital assets but placed solely in my husband's name." Judge Harmon's eyebrows rose as she examined the evidence. "Mr. Wilson, were you aware of these accounts?" Wilson looked genuinely blindsided. "No, Your Honor. I'll need to confer with my client." "By all means," the judge said, her tone cooling considerably. The whispered conference between Richard and his attorney grew heated, with Richard's face flushing an angry red as Wilson repeatedly shook his head. When they finished, Wilson stood reluctantly. "Your Honor, my client maintains these accounts were for legitimate business purposes." "I see," Judge Harmon said, though her tone suggested otherwise. She turned back to Sarah. "Mrs. Matthews, please continue." Sarah nodded. "Your Honor, there's one more matter." She hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "During our marriage, I completed a master's degree in business administration, taking night classes while my husband was unaware. For the past 3 years, I've been building a small consulting business under my maiden name." She presented business records showing modest but growing success. "I kept this separate not out of deception, but out of necessity. Mr. Matthews has consistently undermined my attempts at independence, including sabotaging job interviews and threatening potential employers." Richard's face contorted with rage. This was clearly news to him. His attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm as he started to rise. "Mrs. Matthews," Judge Harmon said, leaning forward with interest, "why are you sharing this information now, when it potentially introduces assets that could be subject to division?" Sarah's eyes met the judge's directly. "Because I believe in honesty, Your Honor, and because I want nothing from him except what is rightfully mine, half of our marital assets and the freedom to build my own life." The courtroom remained silent as Judge Harmon considered everything before her. After several long moments, she spoke. "Mrs. Sarah Matthews." The formal address caused Richard to snicker again, clearly believing the judge was about to admonish his wife for her amateur legal approach. "The court is impressed by your preparation and presentation today," Judge Harmon continued, silencing Richard's laughter instantly. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm ordering a full forensic accounting of all marital assets, including these offshore accounts. The prenuptial agreement is set aside pending further review of the circumstances under which it was signed." Richard half rose from his seat, his face a mask of disbelief. "Your Honor, you can't." "Mr. Matthews," Judge Harmon cut him off sharply, "you will remain silent or be held in contempt." "I haven't finished." Richard sank back into his seat, stunned. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I'm issuing a temporary order freezing all accounts to prevent any further movement of assets. Mrs. Matthews has made a compelling case for the economic value of her contributions to this marriage, and the court will take that into full consideration." She fixed Richard with a stern gaze. "The court also takes a very dim view of hidden assets and attempts to financially isolate a spouse. Mr. Wilson, I suggest you advise your client on the serious penalties for perjury and contempt of court should any further assets be discovered." Sarah stood perfectly still, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Mrs. Matthews," Judge Harmon said, her tone softening slightly, "the court commends your courage today. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks after the forensic accounting is complete. In the meantime, I'm ordering temporary spousal support to be paid by Mr. Matthews to ensure you have adequate resources." As the judge announced the substantial monthly sum, Richard's face drained of color. His attorney was already scribbling notes, clearly preparing for damage control. "Court is adjourned," Judge Harmon declared, bringing down her gavel with finality. As Sarah gathered her documents, a young woman approached from the gallery, Emma Chen, a law student who had been observing the proceedings. "Mrs. Matthews," Emma said quietly, "that was incredible. I'm interning with the Women's Legal Aid Society. Would you be interested in having some assistance preparing for the next hearing? Pro bono, of course. Sarah smiled, her first genuine smile in months. I would appreciate that very much, Emma. As they walked out together, Sarah passed Richard and his attorney engaged in tense conversation. Richard glared at her, but for the first time in 15 years, his anger held no power over her. She met his gaze steadily before continuing toward the doors. Outside the courthouse, Sarah paused on the steps, taking a deep breath of fresh air. The weight of years of emotional abuse and control was beginning to lift from her shoulders. She wasn't naive enough to think the battle was over, Richard would fight viciously, but for the first time, she believed she could win. 6 months later, Sarah sat in the same courtroom for the final judgment. The forensic accounting had uncovered even more hidden assets, and Richard's attempts to move money after the freeze had resulted in contempt charges. Judge Harmon had been unsparing in her final ruling, awarding Sarah half of all marital assets, substantial alimony, and full ownership of her business. As Sarah left the courthouse that day, Emma Chen, now working as her official legal assistant, walked beside her. "What will you do now?" Emma asked. Sarah looked up at the clear blue sky. "First, I'm taking my children on a vacation, their choice, anywhere they want to go. Then I'm expanding my business. I've already hired 2 other women who left similar situations." She turned to Emma with determination in her eyes. "And I'm establishing a foundation to provide legal and financial education for women in abusive relationships. No one should have to go through what I did without support." Emma nodded approvingly. "You're going to help a lot of people." "That's the plan," Sarah said. "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk into a courtroom alone, but my goal is to make sure no one else has to." As Sarah descended the courthouse steps toward her new life, she carried with her not just a legal victory, but the profound knowledge of her own strength, a strength that had been there all along, waiting for the moment she would claim it. This story reminds us that true courage often emerges in our darkest moments, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, can still prevail against those who abuse power and trust. If you found inspiration in Sarah's journey from victim to victor, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the resilience of the human spirit and the triumph of justice over intimidation.